All right, front of the hip. So, got a lot going on in the front. I'm going to go through it in a couple of different layers with you just to see what's up. I have a couple inklings as to what I think is probably going on, especially because you say like middle of the front of the hip. So, let's start with muscles, and let's actually take a couple layers off. So, obviously you got your abdominal muscles. That doesn't necessarily have to do with your hip. You have this large, it's called your sartorius. It does, like they always call it, like if you had something on the bottom of your shoe and you went to go rotate your knee out and look at the bottom of your shoe, that's what that muscle does. Could be involved. I feel like it's a little bit wide for where you're saying it is. Your hip flexors though, so let's take off a layer. Taking off a couple layers here. All right, so anything that's yellow, that's nerves, right? So if we're just looking, take some of that down, at muscles, your hip flexor is what a lot of people will call it. It's these two muscles combine into one common tendon, and they help lift your knee up, aka when you are walking, they have to be used because it's what bends your hip up. So if you're walking, it's when you're pulling your hip forward after it's behind you. It's actually the only muscle, this psoas muscle is the only one that crosses your actual hip joint and connects your leg to your spine. Everything else connects from hip up to the trunk, but this is the only one that goes spine all the way to the leg, interestingly. Now, another one that can be very annoying and bothersome is called your pectineus muscle. It's like if you're feeling on yourself, like where your pubic bone is right here in the front, if you slide off to the side of your pubic bone and you kind of pin in on the side of your pubic bone, if that is real tender, or if you're kind of digging around right on the shelf of the bone there, on the bottom side, and then where it attaches over, pectineus, what it does is it actually helps draw the leg. It does a couple of different things, but it pulls the leg in. It also helps rotate the leg in, and it also helps flex. So also commonly involved with walking, things like that. Now, when you are talking about, it's a little bit worse if you've been sitting. So when you're sitting, these guys can get into, they're in a shortened position. I'm definitely not in the field that something in a shortened position just shortens and stays short, but that moves us over to the next big topic of nerves. So this is your femoral nerve, this big one that I have highlighted pink here. Sits right in between these two layers of your hip flexor, right? And it actually stems off of your spine. So if we're looking at where it comes from, it starts up here off of your low back, which is why you'll see in your exercises that I gave you some low back extension, things like that, just to get the spine moving. And then it comes down and it crosses right smack dab in the front of the hip. What it innervates, and innervates just meaning what it supplies, like which muscles it supplies. So it does your quadriceps, so it innervates your big quad muscle right there in your thigh. It also does this iliacus muscle, and it also does this pectineus muscle. It also does skin, so you were saying you don't have much burning, but these muscles, I think, are what's being a little bit of a booger on you. Last thing I wanted to look at is your actual just hip joint. So if we take that off, you don't particularly sound like it's just your hip joint. Most people will give this complaint of a C, like if they were to grip their hip, it gives this whole kind of ring of discomfort, but it is right here in the front, and you can get what's called hip impingement, meaning if you are bringing that hip forward, what has to happen, I'll try to draw on this. So if you're trying to bring your leg forward, right? Oh, my pen is going to be weird on me. Hold on. I don't know why this pen has been this way. It doesn't like to write. Alright, it's being lame. I'll draw on the bone. So, if you're trying to bring your leg forward, what has to happen is this has to be able to roll backwards, if that makes sense, so that everything clears. Otherwise, you can get a little pinching kind of right here in the front of the hip. Don't necessarily think that's exactly what yours sounds like. It sounds a little bit more muscular in nature, but just wanted to give you a little overview of it. So that's a little rundown. You'll see on your exercises some stuff that activates the hip flexors. You'll see, and I'll go ahead and flip this guy around. You've got some clamshell exercises where you're opening your hip, like opening your knees, I should say. And it is firing all of these deep rotating muscles. When these guys are all nice and strong, it helps take pressure off of the hip joint itself. Oh, sorry. Going around. So try these out. If they're painful, don't do them. If I need to come by and check your hip out, totally fine to do that. You just let me know. Sometimes just having a visual is a little like, oh, that's what's going on in there.